Ravager Hill is a game about, well, Ravagers, and the slightest of hills. When watching the Hermits play Tango's Decked Out 2, the Ravagers always seemed like the most fun part, at least for me. So that inspired me to build a whole game where all you do is escape from Ravagers. Although I realised that on its own that wasn't quite a full game, so I added two more mechanics. First, snowballs pop up out of the ground around the course, and players must collect these. This gives the players a reason to run around, causing them to interact with the Ravagers. And secondly, I added targets to the centre, to give the game a purpose. Light all the lamps and you win. Not only does this give the player a goal, but having the targets in the centre also gives the Ravagers a focal point. The middle is usually the most dangerous part. That's also why I designed it as a hill. The centre is slightly higher than the rest, and I believe mobs in Minecraft generally tend towards the highest point they can reach. The first version of this game that I made is a single player experience. There are 8 lamps to light and 10 Ravagers to avoid. I built this in our winter district on Zedcraft, which is one of the reasons I opted for this ice and snow theme. I also thought it would be fun to make the snowballs hard to see and find, although in hindsight I think for a lot of players this just added to the frustration. I also originally thought it would be fun to have the snowballs pop out randomly. It was set that every 2.5 seconds there was a 1 in 9 chance of a random snowball appearing. But the main takeaway from people playing this was I didn't get any snowballs. So for the single player version, I improved this by making it so that every 25 seconds a snowball would fire. It would still appear in a random spot, but this way players knew that there were snowballs to be found, so it was worth exploring. The lack of randomness also means that the speedrun competition was fairer, because everybody received snowballs at the same rate. Now the game was a success, so I decided to make a multiplayer version. Here are the key differences in the multiplayer version. The build is clearly split into different sections, making it harder to get lost. Players naturally know where they are and how to get to other areas. The snowballs now come out onto snow layers. Now, I think this is a big improvement, as not knowing where to find the snowballs in the original game was just an annoyance. And there are now 4 separate sets of 7 lamps, and the game ends when one player lights all 7 of their lamps. This means that the game works best with 4 players, perfect for the events that we host on Zedcraft. Now, I'm going to be talking about the redstone for the rest of this video, in both versions of the game. If you'd like to know how the game works, please stick around, but if that doesn't interest you, thank you for watching. Let's go have a look at the redstone. Now this is a mess, but I do have some advice for you. If you're building a big game, just hollow out underneath and you'll have loads of room for redstone. So none of this really had to be particularly compact. I was kind of free to make it a little bit of a mess. But if we start over here, now the start button is up here, which sends the signal down here through this monostable thing. So we get a single pulse out of here, which moves this redstone block to here, turning on the game. And now what this redstone line does over here is it turns on this clock. So you see the piston here will push. The observer will detect that block moving there, which starts this circuit here. And because this block is here, it completes the circuit. So if I just move this block here, you can see we get that pulse in, and then this clock goes round and round and round, and then once this is pulled back, the clock turns off. The whole purpose of this is to power the score. So the score is up here, so every time this clock goes around, 1 pulse goes to here, and the redstone here is a 10-tick clock, which is exactly 1 second. So I decided to add this in to make the scoring actually be in seconds. So you see here, this score here, every single nugget in here is 1 second. Now annoyingly, it doesn't stack to 60, it stacks to 64. But if you move it around like this, you can see this is exactly 4 minutes and 52 seconds. The other side of this redstone line goes to the lamp. So this lamp just signals that somebody is playing the game. Then it's, hello, and it's this lamp here. Now this block that gets powered by the start button also sends a signal through here. This dispenses an item. Now it will do this at the start of the game, but it will also do it at the end of the game, and that allows there to be a 5-minute timer after the game has finished where snowballs and items can despawn. We wouldn't want someone to start the game whilst there are still snowballs in the arena, so that's why we have this lamp here. So if either of these lamps are on, you shouldn't be starting the game. And this is all a bit of a mess. But part of the reason for that is I wanted people to be able to turn the game off. So, for example, if somebody tries the game, they don't light up all the lamps, they're a bit tired of dying from Ravagers, maybe it's not their cup of tea, maybe it's, a frustrating game for them, they can push the start button and that will also turn the game off. But if somebody wins, then a signal will come through here and it will turn the game off. So that's why I have everything kind of controlled by this monostable thing here and this redstone block. So that's everything over here. Now if we follow this redstone line over here, we can see how the rest of the game works. So firstly, the signal goes to here, pushing both of these. This is very similar to what I did for the timer over there, where the observer sends a pulse into the system straight away and the block completes the circuit. And this circuit is 25 seconds. So there's better ways of doing clocks in Minecraft than a full stack of repeaters or however many this is. But it works. I think it's exactly 25 seconds. And the other key thing to note about this is that the signal first comes through here and then straight away goes up this line. And then 25 seconds later, it goes again. So what this line here does is this controls the snowballs in the arena. So that means that when the game turns on, we get a snowball almost immediately. And then every 25 seconds we get another snowball. Now if you come up here, this is a typical shulker box randomizer. I think it's a Mumbo design that I followed. So there's 9 shulker boxes in, where is it? In here. Every time it resets, this gets broken, goes into this hopper, which goes into this dropper, which then fires into this hopper, back into that dispenser, and then the dispenser fires a random shulker box. And depending on how full that shulker box is, you get a different signal, and this Redcoder thing will then light up one of these 9 lamps. I'll put some tutorials in the description on these aspects here. And now, if we follow these lines, it should be fairly simple. You can actually see them go off into the distance here. So let's look at the one that is currently lit up. We can follow this down here. And this powers a note block. So if you're near it, you will hear that sound and you will know that there's a snowball nearby. And it also dispenses a snowball into the arena. So there's 9 lines, which means there's 9 different spots where the snowballs can appear. Now if you go back to this redstone line, where we turned on the clock, and go this way, we have another monostable circuit here. So this is a single tick pulse that goes here. Part of what this does, if we follow the stone line, it comes all the way up here. So these are torch towers that lead to a memory cell. So it's 2 droppers facing each other. I'll show you that up above in a bit. But yeah, so the first thing this does is it resets these, which essentially turns off all 8 lamps to start up the game. So if we come up above here, so here the target blocks are below the lamps. There's an item here that starts here. So when that line that I was just showing you, when that resets these cells, all that is doing is taking the block and putting it back in the top. So these are facing each other. So those torches, all they do is power this dropper, well, power all the droppers, and put the items back in the top. And now you can see that these three are powered and this one isn't. If we then come down here, we can see that we've got a bunch of torches here. This is essentially an AND gate. If all of these torches are off, that means all 4 targets have been hit, which means if you come down here, that means that all of this dust will be off. Now you notice we have the same thing on the other side. It's exactly the same. If all 8 targets have been hit, this dust turns off, which turns on this torch. And now this torch does 2 very simple things. The first is it lets off a firework to really signify to the player that they have won. And the second thing that it does is it sends a pulse into this block. So that is what happens when the game is won. The redstone travels all the way back to the start, sends another pulse through this monostable, which puts this redstone block back here. Now this is the multiplayer version. The redstone is improved quite a bit. So this ice line here is the starting line. And you notice this comes through this sandstone block. That comes from the 5-minute clock. Once the game ends, it will drop an item in there and that allows the items to despawn, just like the other version. But here, that cuts off the start button, so that if you press the start button while the game is finished, you cannot start again. Both the off switch and the start switch come down here and they come through this monostable. So the monostable thing is near the center rather than near the start, but it essentially does the same job. And we have some note blocks now, a little jingle that starts when the game starts. Other than that, the start is fairly similar. So this works very similar to before. These 2 lines just go to those torch towers on all 4 sides. You can see the yellow ones over there, and that just resets all the targets, all the memory cells, same as before. But this line also travels to this central torch tower. Now the purpose of this is quite simple. I have 4 lamps in the centre which show who won. So if 2 players finish nearly at the same time, they can look to the centre and see which lamp is lit up. And you may notice that there's these 4 diagonal lines here. That is coming from the winning line. So when someone wins, that will trigger the dropper. And that's how it shows who won. And now if we talk about the winning line here, so this is the same as the single player version. Once you hit all of the targets, all of the torches turn off, which turns off this dust, which turns on this torch and sends a signal through here. But what you may notice here is right now, the signal can't get through. And that's because each of these 4 lines can be blocked by this redstone block here. We've got a redstone block here. And then over on this side, we've got exactly the same thing. And what that means is, if the game is off or somebody has just won, then this block moves here and stops anybody else from being able to win. So that's why we have the signal in the middle. So let's say that red won, the signal would come through this block, the block would be lowered. It would send the signal up here, trigger that dropper, the lamp would turn on and a firework would go off. And then on all 4 sides, these pistons would push up. Meaning if somebody else finished, they wouldn't get a firework, they wouldn't get their central lamp turned on. So the whole of this kind of central part here is to make it so that only one player can win, and to make it clear who won. And because we control this with these flip-flop things, I need to learn my redstone terminology. I think this is a flip-flop, where you send a single tick pulse to a piston, it spits out the redstone block. And then if we come back to this starting line, The starting line also sends a pulse up to this square here, which will retract the redstone block. So when the game turns on, these blocks will pull down, which will pull down the blocks, making it so that somebody can win. Once all 7 of their targets have been activated, this redstone dust will turn off, this torch will turn on, they will win, so the signal will come through this block, it will trigger their winning mechanism, and then the redstone block will come back here, lifting all 4 of the pistons, making it so nobody else can win. I hope that makes sense. And then this line of torches here is just a resetting mechanism in the same way that this is also a resetting mechanism. And then the last thing to note is we also have, so when the game starts, the signal travels up here, which also travels to the clock. Similar to what we did before, you get the pulse from the observer, that block pushes in there. Now this is only a 10-second clock. I made it different to the single player version because when there's 4 players running around, you know, there needs to be more snowballs for them to find. Every time that this fires, a Shulker box randomizer triggers. It's the same one from the single player build. You've got 9 lines here, and the only difference with this mechanism, again, let's follow this one. You notice how now we're actually sending the signal through yet another monostable thing. So we're getting a single tick pulse out of here. And what this does is it moves this redstone block back and forth. So the next time this blue line triggers, the redstone block will move to here, and this snowball will trigger. The time after that the blue line triggers, the redstone block will be moved back to here, and this one will trigger. The whole purpose of doing that is to make it so that there are 18 different snowball spots rather than 9. Because with the arena being slightly bigger and there being 4 players, and the fact that I've now marked the snowball locations, I felt that 9 snowball spots just wasn't enough. It's still random, because it could be one of the 9 of these that trigger, and then it's like a binary choice that alternates for each of the 9 options. So it feels completely random when you're playing, but actually, if that one has triggered, then technically you know that this one has to trigger next, or this one would need to trigger in order for that one to be available again, if that makes sense. But when you're actually playing the game, you're just running around, you're not thinking about anything like that. And then the last thing to note is one of these 2 redstone blocks that controls the pistons that we were talking about earlier also goes to the start. So this sends a pulse, this turns on here, which will spit an item out into there. Now this torch here is only on when the game is being played, because that's when this line would be off. So that powers a lamp up there, and then this line here, which we talked about earlier, how it cuts off the starting mechanism. This also powers a lamp. So if the game is being run, one lamp is on. If the game finished, but we're still waiting for the 5-minute timer, the other lamp is on. Once this item despawns, both lamps will be off, and these blocks will be where they are now, so the game can begin.